Good evening, I'm Ian Hannamansing. Tonight, Canada's new job report shows a pandemic economy in historic freefall.
You need to know that there's a plan to get you through this and get you back on the job.
Is this the bottom? And how do we climb out?
I'm going to use the pool noodle to make sure that you're at a safe distance.
A tour of Quebec schools with the doors set to reopen.
I never thought it was to this extent of vulgar language towards women and their bodies.
A Winnipeg woman talks publicly after being the object of hateful language online. And preparing for a Mother's Day like no other.
You want to be able to just hug your mom, hug your grandma.
Saying thank you from a distance and in Zoom calls with grandma. This is The National. Canada's COVID-19 crisis has taken so much. Thousands of people have died, tens of thousands have fallen ill, and millions have suffered the financial cost of shutting down the economy to slow the virus. Well, today we saw the brutal reality for working people.
These numbers tell us what we already knew, that right now, Canadians are hurting because of this pandemic.
Here's how badly. More than 3 million jobs gone since the crisis began, almost 2 million in April alone. More than a third of the workforce didn't work or had hours cut in half. Here's another measure of how bad. During the devastating 1982 recession, employment dropped 5.4% over 17 months. The drop since this February alone, almost 16%. It's hit every province and most sectors, but especially hotels and restaurants, construction, manufacturing, and retail. The government is extending its emergency wage subsidy past June to try to slow layoffs, but the worst could be yet to come. Canada's official unemployment rate leapt to 13%, the second highest level since 1976. Of course, the toll is felt by both men and women, but many women have particular concerns about how it's playing out. Catherine Cullen looks at today's report with that in mind.
Some outdoor activities.
Amanda Taggart is trying to focus on the nice moments, but the single mom of two acknowledges the pandemic has been tough, especially since work as a supply teacher dried up.
As a single mom, everything's on your shoulders to provide all the income from the house, to do all the homeschooling now, as well as taking care of the home, meal preps, everything right now.
Women were hit harder early on, with jobs in the restaurant and retail sector disappearing. This month's data shows male-dominated fields like manufacturing and construction are feeling the effects too. Women now make up just over half of the jobs lost.
Women are both frontlined and sidelined in this crisis.
This economist says it's a shift from the past when men have been the hardest hit.
Women make up 80% of healthcare, and they are being put in the front lines of providing services. And on the other hand, they're also being sidelined in service sectors that have been shut down.
The Prime Minister acknowledged today some workers are being affected more than others.
Particularly women and new Canadians and young people.
His government has introduced emergency measures to try to help, but he says more will be needed, including childcare.
There needs to be more and secure childcare spaces for people to get back into the workforce.
There also needs to be jobs to go back to. To create them, politicians often pour money into construction projects. Some argue it's time to spend in areas that will help more women, including healthcare and childcare.
In systems that provide care and will actually relieve huge amounts of burden that we have placed for too long on women.
Amanda Taggart's burden has eased a bit. After we spoke with her, she found a job, something millions of Canadians are hoping for right now. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
So let's talk about what might be next. Peter Armstrong is our senior business correspondent. And Peter, first of all, have things bottomed out?
Well, I mean, shockingly, Ian, as deep and as profound these numbers are, they're probably not the worst of it, at least not yet. And, you know, think about a small business in your town or your neighborhood right across the country that's just barely holding on now. As this crisis deepens and as it drags on, as it will, some of those businesses won't be able to make it. They'll decide to make adjustments, they'll decide to make layoffs, and we'll have to account for those. The other big thing is the labor force survey that we got these jobs data from was in the field in mid-April, and we know things have changed since then. 7.6 million Canadians have applied for the CERB. And so when you look at those that have been laid off or lost work or lost hours, they still don't sort of add up to 7.6 million. So there's a missing number there. We'll look for them to be added in to the main numbers.
Now, on the plus side, there are businesses that are reopening or ramping up. What should bounce back first?
Well, I think you could look at construction sites. We'll probably go back pretty quickly, and we've seen a bunch of those jobs were laid off in the last month. Manufacturing, it's harder, but we could see a lot of those jobs too. But let's bring up a graph here to look at where the job losses have been concentrated. And so far, we're seeing it in food and accommodation and retail sales. Those are going to take longer, if only because that depends on the consumers of Canada, the me's and the you's, going back out and finding the confidence to buy and to spend and to go to these places. You have to think about when's the next time you're going to meet a friend for lunch somewhere, let alone go out and see a movie.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And he'll be back later in the program, along with a personal finance expert, as we answer some of your questions on jobs and the economy. That's in about 30 minutes. The jobless numbers are bleak in the United States as well. More than 20 million jobs disappearing in April, the worst monthly loss ever recorded. The 14.7% unemployment rate hasn't been seen since 1939. Just 2 months ago, it was at a half-century low of 3.5%. Donald Trump insists he'll bring jobs back. Katie Simpson looks at a well-known Washington business that isn't so confident.
Ben's Chili Bowl is a Washington institution. The family-run restaurant opened when D.C. was still segregated. It survived the race riots and became a gathering place for African-American leaders.
All of a sudden, this hit and it just flipped us upside down.
The flagship location remains open for takeout, but the family's 3 other restaurants are closed and may never reopen.
I'm sure everyone does. So we want to hold on, and we will just have to see how that looks.
The hospitality and service industry suffered the most, according to the April labor report. The loss of 20 million jobs in a single month wipes out most of the gains made after the 2008 recession and triples the unemployment rate. A week into May, and there are predictions this will get worse.
We've probably added about another 4 or 5% to the unemployment rate, and so probably the next number will be a little bit higher than this.
Who needs it? I wish we didn't need it.
The president met with his allies to discuss the next round of relief measures. Knowing his re-election efforts will be judged on the state of the economy, he offered optimism.
It's going to be transition to greatness, because we're going to do something very fast, and we're going to have a phenomenal year next year.
There's no way that many of these that are hardest hit in the food services industry, leisure and hospitality are going to be able to come back to the level of activity that they did prior to the crisis.
The numbers showed workers of color are being hit disproportionately hard, with the highest unemployment rates for Hispanics and African Americans. The same 2 communities also hit hardest by the virus itself.
It's sad. We're saddened by it. That's one of the reasons it's so important for us to be here.
There is one point of hope. Of the 20 million people now jobless, 18 million said they don't expect it to be permanent. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Canada's COVID case count is still climbing, but being pushed up almost entirely by 2 provinces. Of the more than 1,500 new cases today, 477 were in Ontario, its second highest number in a week. Provincial officials say they are perplexed by the degree of community spread that's still happening. And Quebec remains hardest hit, today adding more than 900 cases. More than half of Quebec's total cases are from the Greater Montreal area, so school reopening there is being delayed, but the rest of Quebec will hit a major milestone on Monday. Alison Northcott shows us the major changes in store for elementary students.
As the student enter, they're going to follow the blue line Caroline Simard spent the week preparing her grade 1 classroom, measuring space between desks and making sure each student has separate supplies because sharing them is no longer allowed.
It's unfortunate that we have such a great play structure and the kids won't be allowed to play in it, but I'm pretty confident that we'll find creative ways to adapt.
For recess, each class will have its own toys, disinfected after each use, and staff will have to ensure physical distancing.
I'm going to use the pool noodle to make sure that you're at a safe distance, so to show the kids, oh, don't forget.
These markers show students where to line up 2 meters apart before going in and disinfecting their hands.
How big of a change is all of this?
Well, it's a change for sure, because normally they would just rush off the bus and go and greet their friends.
Many schools are closing gyms, cafeterias, and libraries too. The preparations are underway across Quebec.
We have closed up the fountains for the students.
But the province has postponed reopening schools in the Montreal area because that's where the virus has hit the hardest. In the rest of Quebec, come Monday, attendance will be optional.
Many parents are concerned.
Only 30 of 188 students are coming back to this school in Ormstown.
When we saw the number of students that were returning to us, I felt relief. I felt a real sense of relief that this was going to be doable.
She says if she had a bigger school with more kids, it would be harder.
It really brings all the teachers and all the staff to be very creative in our ways and to adjust and adapt.
She says it's a challenge, but a necessary one to make sure all students are safe. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Sorel-Tracy, Quebec.
The return to class, just one of the ways Canada is easing back open right now. But as people prepare for that, there's new evidence that the kind of restrictions we're slowly coming out of do make a difference. Shauna Reid takes us through it.
Canadians have sacrificed a lot, but a new Canadian study says it works.
The more measures people implemented in a certain area, the stronger the signal towards a reduction of epidemic.
The study, published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, looked at 144 locations around the world that had more than 375,000 cases of COVID-19 by March 27th. One big finding, places that closed schools quickly were better off than ones that didn't. And if you combine that with another intervention like banning mass gatherings, physical distancing restrictions, or closing non-essential businesses, restaurants, and bars, the gains were bigger.
Our data indicate that if you implement 2 of these measures, that you might reduce growth by about 30%.
I think it's very exciting to see that there's research being conducted and that we finally have answers to questions that we had, such as which measures are the most effective.
This epidemiologist says pacing is critical in easing restrictions.
This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we can't just throw open the doors all open right away and let everyone flood out into the open.
And schools are an important part of that.
This data is compelling, or suggestive rather, that we should be slow about how we approach the school situation.
But researchers say low community transmission will need to be in place.
We need to be very careful here just that we get this part right, because otherwise we will have mass gatherings on schoolyards, which could backfire big time.
Shauna Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
And not everyone is preparing to get kids back in the classroom. Nova Scotia becoming the latest province to announce the closure of all public schools for the rest of the school year.
That's everyone from P to 9 and secondary students. At-home learning, though, will continue to June 5th. That means your kitchen is a classroom for a little bit longer.
The Premier says teachers will continue to work until the end of June to provide learning materials and finalize report cards. Daycares in the province are slated to be opened in early June.
Today, I am pleased to announce further loosening of restrictions.
Already ahead of many other parts of the country, New Brunswick is entering its next COVID-19 recovery phase. This includes reopening restaurants, retail stores, and some daycares. Meanwhile, in PEI, people can have up to 5 others in their home so long as they're physically distancing. The province had no new cases, and all 27 previously confirmed cases have recovered. In the United States, a top aide to Vice President Mike Pence has tested positive for COVID-19, raising questions over safety protocols in the White House.
We've taken every single precaution to protect the president, the same guidelines that our experts have put in place.
News that Katie Miller, Pence's press secretary, tested positive today comes just a day after Donald Trump's personal valet was diagnosed with the virus. Miller is the wife of Trump's senior advisor, Stephen Miller. Across the United States, there's still lots of questions and anger over the death of a black man in Georgia, even though murder charges have now been laid. Ahmaud Arbery was out jogging in February when two white men shot and killed him in the road. As Stephen D'Souza tells us, some people are describing the attack as a modern-day lynching.
Today should have been Ahmaud Arbery's 26th birthday, but instead of celebrating, his family is coming to terms with the arrest of two men charged with his murder.
I just want justice for my son. I just want them to pay the price for the crime they did.
Yesterday's arrest of father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael came more than 2 months after Arbery was killed, but just a few days after video of the shooting was leaked. The video shows Arbery out for a run when the McMichaels chase him down. After a struggle, Arbery is shot and killed. Gregory McMichael, a former police officer, had told investigators they thought Arbery was a robbery suspect and they were acting in self-defense.
I can't answer what another agency did or didn't see. But
the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case this week after two district attorneys were forced to recuse themselves. Both had personal connections to the suspects. One said the men acted within state laws.
Within 36 hours, we had secured warrants for two individuals for felony murder. I think that speaks volumes for itself, and that the probable cause was clear to our agents pretty quickly.
No justice! No peace! The video caused a national uproar, bringing old wounds to the surface.
We can say once again, a black man was lynched in Georgia.
Certainly it was a disturbing or troubling video, no question about that.
In a phone interview, President Donald Trump offered condolences and support for law enforcement.
It could be something that we didn't see on tape.
Don't get excited about the arrests you saw.
The arrests have done little to subdue anger. The community wants investigations into the prosecutors who sat on the case and the third man involved who recorded the shooting.
I won't be satisfied till everybody involved.
Activists say they've seen killers in these kinds of cases walk free before, so the arrests are the first step in the long road to justice. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
Search teams in Truro, Nova Scotia continued looking for a 3-year-old boy missing since Wednesday night.
We've concluded our work around the original site, and we've expanded that search zone further down the Salmon River toward the mouth of Cobequid Bay. There are searchers that are ready to deploy to those areas as well on foot if required.
Helicopters, along with dozens of personnel on the ground, could be seen searching along the river through much of the day. Dylan Ealer disappeared 3 nights ago while playing in his grandmother's yard. Last night, police said the search was being considered a recovery operation. And a proposed class action lawsuit has been filed in connection with last month's mass shooting in Nova Scotia. Nicholas Beaton, the widower of one of the victims, is the suit's plaintiff, which alleges the estate of the gunman is liable to the families of the victims who lost their lives or were injured due to the gunman's actions. So far, 10 families are involved, with 4 others considering signing on. An NHL team took swift action today against a player who made demeaning and sexist comments in a private online chat. But a Winnipeg woman who was one of the targets is trying to turn it into something positive. Cameron McIntosh has her story.
As a social media influencer, Nicole Zajac poses and posts to promote positive body image. But this picture became something else when it wound up in an Instagram chat group of elite Winnipeg-raised hockey players, including NHLer Brendan Leipsic.
Oink, oink. She's getting way bigger. No, you're too fat, Nicole. Joints can't take it.
All guys she personally knows.
It does hurt that I know them personally and that they're saying this about me, but yeah, I wasn't too shocked.
It gets a lot worse. Screen grabs of the chat show Leipsic and others making repeated, degrading, misogynistic comments. All of it private until it was posted anonymously online.
I know group chats like this exist, but I never thought it was to this extent of vulgar language towards women and their bodies.
Yesterday, Leipsic issued an apology. Today, the Washington Capitals let him go. And the Florida Panthers say they're reviewing the involvement of their minor leaguer, Jack Rodwald.
It's very disappointing that a few individuals can be involved in something like this, and it has not only tarnishes the game of hockey, but it's sport in general.
Somehow people think that respect and some of these things are inherent within the sport environment, but they're not. They need to be taught, and they need to be, checked on.
Oink, oink.
Zajac, meanwhile, is turning the words that hurt her into something positive, sharing this post, one picture with their comments and a second with hers.
I just wanted to put out a positive spin on such a negative situation and really have a message out there for other women that may be going through the same thing.
Meanwhile, she says 2 of those players have personally apologized.
I just hope they come out of this like a better human.
Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A message of hope tonight, 75 years after a day that changed the world.
Never give up, never despair. That was the message of VE Day.
Next on The National, a call to find inspiration in the past to face the challenges of today.
Hi, Grandma. Hello.
And preparing for Mother's Day no one expected.
You want to be able to just hug your mom, hug your grandma.
And a wicked taste of winter this morning with more on the way. We're back in 2 minutes.
Today, we mark the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day and the end of the Second World War on the continent.
But there were no parades and no grand ceremonies. This is VE Day in the age of COVID-19. Ottawa's commemoration was online, featuring the Royal Canadian Artillery Band. Solo performances in front of the National War Memorial, and pre-recorded messages.
Let us celebrate freedom and remain strong in the face of adversity.
Elsewhere, there were quiet, physically distanced, wreath-laying ceremonies, like this one at Toronto's Old City Hall. And here at the Saskatchewan War Memorial in Regina. The Prime Minister used the moment to remind Canadians those who fought for freedom are now the most vulnerable to the virus.
Today, as our generation faces our own battle, let us be inspired by them and their valor as we protect them and all Canadians.
A similar sentiment was shared in the UK today, where the wartime spirit is being used to evoke unity and sacrifice in the battle against a new global threat. Margaret Evans was there.
Britain's red arrows slicing through blue skies above London in a salute to Victory in Europe Day. All the more dramatic for the empty feel of the city and its famed landmarks below. The opposite of the crowds thronging the streets in celebration 75 years ago today, the wartime leader, Winston Churchill, declaring victory before them.
This is your victory. Victory of the cause of freedom is every day.
Today's memories are laced both with nostalgia and gratitude for a generation whose spirit Britons so often call upon. Today, no exception.
We're now engaged in a new struggle against the coronavirus, which demands the same spirit of national endeavour.
That wartime generation is the one most vulnerable to the virus, and many today are in isolation, shielding.
Are you the Canadian lady?
I'm the Canadian. 97-year-old veteran Tommy Parkinson was serving in Italy when the war ended.
The thing about me, I've always been with people. This was the first time I've ever been on my own, if you can understand what I mean. So you're last man standing.
His message then.
The Queen chose the same hour to address the nation that her father, King George VI, did all those years ago.
I say with pride that we are still a nation those brave soldiers, sailors and airmen would recognize and admire.
We meet again. The day came to a close with a virtual sing-along of old wartime tunes. But we're leaving the last word to the last man standing, or singing.
But I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
Next, the experts answer your questions about jobs and the economy, including this one. I was laid off. What kind of jobs will be in high demand soon? And later.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
A different sort of Mother's Day this year. But first, as we go to break.
There's so much to do in here.
If you've lost track of what day or month it is, then this probably isn't helping.
I'm in Port Sydney, Ontario, and as you can see, it's snowing on the 8th of May.
Some people just got a taste of winter, but others weren't as lucky. The snow even caught a certain national host off guard. So what's behind Mother Nature's latest cruel joke?
It may seem like the calendar's been thrown out the window, but this is what the setup is with the atmospherics across North America. Very strong high pressure closer to the North Pole is forcing this Arctic air mass very far south. So it's not just the breadth of it from the east of the Rockies over towards Atlantic Canada. It's how far to the south it's going as well. It's driving strong wind chills, lake effect snows, and also some record lows will be set by Saturday morning.
While Arctic air isn't something you want to hear in May, it's important to keep things in perspective.
On the plus side, I believe this keeps the monster killer hornets at bay.
I can't get up.
And you thought we'd seen it all in 2020.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Smithers, and I'm a career coach, youth engagement strategist, and writer. Life in this new normal has definitely been a transition. Typically, I am accustomed to meeting clients in the community. However, now, as you can see, I am working out of an organized mess in my living room. Most days I'm waking up to around 20 to 30 emails from potential clients requesting help with resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn packages, anything to get them into the job force. Are overnights something that you're open to? Many jobs that are available right now are in customer service, they're in healthcare, they're in community service sectors, they're in factories. They're predominantly overnight positions, which a lot of people aren't able to accommodate due to not having childcare. So where does that leave them? I am hopeful that soon I will be able to go back to what I pride myself in doing, which is helping people secure roles that they're passionate about instead of securing roles that they have to for survival.
Well, tonight, with the release of those staggering job loss numbers, we're going to ask some of your questions about jobs and the economy. Our CBC News senior business correspondent, Peter Armstrong, is back, along with personal finance journalist Rubina Ahmed-Huq. Some of the questions are general. Our first one, though, to you, Rubina, is quite specific. Will traditional employment insurance be made available after the CERB runs out or ends?
So the short answer is yes. If you qualified for unemployment insurance when you lost your job, you could apply for it after the CERB runs out. If you lost your job between March 15th and October 3rd due to COVID-19, or you lost income due to COVID-19, you would first get the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is $2,000 every 4 weeks up to a maximum of 16 weeks. And once that is exhausted, if you did qualify for unemployment insurance benefits, you could then apply for them without the CERB affecting those benefits whatsoever.
All right, specific question, specific answer. Peter, your question doesn't really lend itself to a specific answer, but here we go. The questioner says, I was laid off. What kind of jobs will be in high demand soon?
And it's a trickier answer than it's not as clear cut, right? Because we don't really know how the economy and how the reopening of the economy is going to work. And a lot of it's going to depend, we were talking about this earlier in the show, Ian, it will depend on how we as consumers go back and sort of avail ourselves of a reopened economy. You know, 70% of Canadian jobs are in small and medium-sized businesses, and those are the ones that are most vulnerable and will be most vulnerable to the whims of consumers. That if we don't go back out and start buying from our local shops and shopping in our local stores and going to our barbers and whatnot, those people won't be hiring back as quickly. You know, I think the more traditional jobs in construction and manufacturing will bounce back more quickly. But the real question, and it will be important to the entire economic recovery and the economic growth in this country, is how will those small and medium-sized businesses get back up and running? And so I think that's where we'll see a lot of the jobs either working or not as the recovery begins to get some traction.
Yeah, I stopped at my dry cleaner on the way in here in Vancouver. It had not closed down. He's down to 25% of his business. Lots of distancing inside his shop, but to your point, he's not sure what it's going to take to entice people to come back, even when they're, getting their work clothes cleaned in the future. How safe will they feel? Rubina, here's a question for you. I've recently lost my job because of the outbreak. What will happen when I have to renew my mortgage this fall?
Well, if you stay with the same financial institution, nothing will happen. You will be able to negotiate your rate with your current financial institution, and they will not be asking you for any paperwork. The problem is if you want to move your mortgage to another bank or another financial institution, which sometimes customers do to get a better deal, that would be problematic because then they would do a credit check on you. You would be required to provide paperwork that shows your income. And of course, if your income is lower, you may not qualify for that same mortgage that you got when you did have a job. So it may hinder your ability to shop around and get the best rate, but really you should still be looking up what the best rate is and asking your current financial institution to meet that because they probably can.
So an underlying question from many of us is, will the economy come all the way back in Canada to where it was 3 months ago? Here's what Ontario Premier Doug Ford said about that today.
The people of Ontario have been incredible. And we've all been going in the same direction. With their help, I'm confident it might be a little while, but we'll get back to where we were.
Okay, so Premier Ford is confident. Peter, here's a questioner. I'm underemployed. When do we expect the economy to come back strong?
Well, so here we have a whole alphabet of options, right? There's the V-shaped recovery, a sharp down and a sharp sort of recovery. There's the U-shaped recovery, sharp down and then across for a long time before it starts to go up. And I think most people think it'll be more of a check mark, that it'll go down sharp and take some time to come back. We'll get the first indications of what that'll look like, frankly, this coming week, as slowly some provinces begin the first steps of reopening. And we'll have to watch that closely to see how that goes, but what support will be needed. Those federal programs are going to have to be flexible going forward.
Rubina, a lot of pessimism from a lot of people and probably underscored by the employment numbers we saw today. Do you have an optimistic message for people generally?
Well, generally speaking, the federal government, the provincial government, they're doing everything they possibly can to make sure that people do not run out of money during this time and that people have money to buy the essentials. Despite those numbers being as dramatic as they were, the unemployment numbers, we know that many businesses are raring to go as soon as they're allowed to. So it's not like 2008, 2009, where companies simply didn't know where to go. It's more of the government saying that we are ready to open and businesses starting to, in a safe way, starting to reopen and call some of those employees back. So that's a bit of a positive sign, knowing that businesses want to get up and running. They just simply can't do it right now because they're not allowed to.
All right, Rubina, Peter, thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
And as we've mentioned, we'll be asking your questions about COVID-19 most nights. So send those to us. You can message us directly on Instagram at CBC The National, or send us an email at covid@cbc.ca. Just put The National in the subject line. Now, as we know, COVID-19 and the economic shutdown have hit low-income Canadians hard, adding a layer of worry to paying the bills or going to a food bank. One Winnipeg family let Karen Pauls into their home.
Mary Burton's grandchildren are blowing off some steam.
Don't get mad.
3 of the 4 kids live permanently with her and her husband in this government-subsidized row house in one of Winnipeg's poorest neighborhoods.
We're struggling with being cramped up in small little 3-bedroom houses or apartments.
But there's not much to do outside.
We're not allowed to go to any of the playgrounds, like any of the school playgrounds or any of the playgrounds that are in the development.
Anyone caught on the play structure faces a fine of nearly $500. That's half a month's grocery money.
Yeah, all right.
Speaking of groceries, keeping food on the table is a bigger challenge than usual.
Okay, so now it's ready and you can start cooking it.
The school's breakfast program helped stretch Burton's grocery budget, but it's not running now. Burton doesn't have a credit card, so she can't order anything online. This is where she does most of her grocery shopping.
But for those of us who live check to check, who are working poor, we're struggling.
Struggling too with the kids' online education.
You've discovered something, you said softly.
Burton's work computer is the only one in the house, so she prints off worksheets.
I'm very worried about my grandchildren not being able to successfully complete this year and be able to do the work next year.
Burton is doing the best she can, but she's tired and frustrated.
Not everybody is able to order skip the dishes and catch up on Netflix. I'm constantly working to make ends meet. And 90%, if not 100% of the people in this complex are the same way.
The hope of life getting back to normal seems as fragile as these bubbles. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Next on The National, an industry that's actually getting a boost during these times. Why you can expect to see more cartoons in the future. But first, here's Andrew with tonight's Pandemic How-To Guide.
For patients with COVID-19 symptoms, the policy at virtually every hospital these days is no visitors. But what if that patient is a child?
So certainly we understand that any experience with the healthcare system for a child is often just anxiety provoking because they're children and they need the security of a parent. And so this would be no different.
Your best advice is still to check with the hospital before you bring your child, because each facility is free to set its own policy. But generally, at least one parent would be allowed to stay. When you arrive with your child, they would go through triage as normal. Then
a child may require supplemental oxygen like a face mask. Sometimes they require puffers, which again, for any children, especially depending on the age, they can be nervous around. And so the parent would typically sit on the bed beside the child to help with that. Sometimes we would take blood work, and again, the parent would be right beside the child while that is happening. And certainly we would do everything that we could to reassure this child and parent to treat them with compassion.
You've been called a trucker's angel.
That's what they're all calling me.
She's providing them with meals for free.
You know how hard life is for the drivers right now. Well, they're facing many struggles. If there is a way that I can help somebody, I'm going to do it.
Hey, I'm Tom Power. We have a pretty amazing show for you this week. I'm chatting with the star of Murdoch Mysteries, Yannick Bisson, singer-songwriter Stephen Page, and food influencer Lauren Toyota. Watch What a Ad, Sunday at 8 on CBC and CBC Gem.
Many of us have been watching more TV and movies than usual since we've been asked to stay home. But when the pandemic set in, new productions were put on pause. Pretty much everything, except, as Eli Glasner tells us, animation.
I'm just liking this. Pre-pandemic, Guru Studio was a bustling hub. Now with hundreds of staff working in their home studios, the mighty pups have the mighty stuff. The animators of Paw Patrol are bounding ahead.
Within 2 days, that crew was working from home. So we didn't really skip a beat in that. And that show, 8 weeks in now, is on the roll.
I can do a live demonstration of...
With software to share their art remotely, Guru staff are finding ways to keep creative collaborations happening while staying safe at home.
Being able to share your screen and draw and have the other team watch, it's kind of establishing a similar feeling of collaboration.
Did you decide what we're watching for movie night?
Now other producers are looking to animation for shows that were forced to stop filming. When the cast and crew of One Day at a Time had to shut down, producers decided to switch gears and create an animated special.
We were asked if we would be willing to jump into the fray and turn around an episode in record time.
Smiley Guy Studios may be a ghost town, but with his staff hard at work at home, the CEO sees more animated adaptations on the horizon.
I think as the stark reality starts to set in as to the challenges of going back to a giant set with lots of people touching each other, this will be something that many other live action shows do explore.
Already, NBC's announced plans to animate an upcoming episode of The Blacklist.
Do you want to talk to me and me and me
This LA-based Canadian voice actor says thanks to her home recording booth, she's busier than ever.
I mean, I'm doing like 4-hour sessions with Warner Brothers and DreamWorks, and like they're getting their shows in the can so that they can keep production going.
Hello, world.
Recording at home is part of the animated advantage. But Jonas Diamond says Canadian studios have another. Most U.S. shows are written in North America and animated overseas, but
the amazing part about Canada is most of the studios are capable of seeing things from the conception all the way to completion and all the steps along the way.
He's hoping the ability for a quick turnaround will see more outlets looking to Canadian studios to keep audiences entertained.
Stay home and stay safe and don't take any crap.
Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
This weekend marks yet another holiday in this pandemic.
You almost find yourself feeling like really emotional, thinking like, oh, I need my mom.
Sunday is Mother's Day. We'll show you how Canadians are sending love to mom while staying safe.
CBC Listen. Hear it all here. Download today.
Sunday, as I'm sure all of you have remembered, is Mother's Day. With that in mind, today the Deputy Prime Minister sent this message to Canada's kids.
I would really like to say, if you can, give your mother a hug, give her a kiss. If you can, maybe help clean up the house a little bit. I know it's hard for you, but it is really also a hard time for parents across the country. And I know your parents, and especially your mothers, would really appreciate it.
Of course, we have changed the way we celebrate these days, and that will have to be true for Mother's Day as well, with many families remaining apart. But that doesn't mean there isn't a need to connect. Here's Bonnie Allen.
Shauna Enns gave birth to a baby girl named Rosie 6 weeks ago. She was ready to be sleep deprived, but not isolated. It's very different from when she gave birth to her twin boys.
My mom was just there, she would be there at 5 in the morning and I'd be just waiting for her because I'd have been up all night long, and she'd come and hold the baby and she'd help us get ready. The same with my mother-in-law and my grandmas. They had a schedule of helping me.
Some physical distancing regulations have eased in Saskatchewan, but so far the grandparents haven't got within 2 meters of the baby. It won't change even for Mother's Day.
You almost find yourself feeling like really emotional, thinking like, oh, I need my mom.
That yearning felt so deeply by so many in the midst of this pandemic.
Hi, Grandma. Hello.
87-year-old Phyllis Robbins will rely on virtual video chats with her family on Mother's Day.
I think it definitely helps mom's mental health. She's lonely.
Like most care homes, Sherbrooke Community Centre prohibits visitors. Robin's family is just grateful that staff work overtime to make other connections.
Need to see the eyes, need to see mom smile. That makes a world of difference for us.
We're going to do a cheers to Mom.
And they savor every ounce of joy.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day, Mom. Happy Mother's Day.
This Mother's Day feels different to Michelle Lapointe. The florist says sales are up and messages are sweeter.
I'm not an overly emotional person, so I found probably about Monday this week, I think I had cried already 3 times just based off of speaking with customers and the messages that they've sent.
Lapointe lost her own mother 4 years ago and understands why people crave that personal contact.
You want to be able to just hug your mom, hug your grandma.
For now, this mother will focus on who she can hug. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Regina.
Next on The National, waiting for your trash to get picked up might not be the most exciting activity, but this garbage crew has set out to turn it into a show. Our moment is next. Brad Sandquist and Brian White might now be better known in Abbotsford, British Columbia as Spider-Man and Captain America. The crew wanted to do something creative as a way to put smiles on the faces of children and families in the Fraser Valley communities. Those superheroes are our moment.
Everybody's stuck at home, and I figured what a better way to put a smile on a kid's face by seeing a superhero out there.
It's making everybody smile, from the kids to the parents,
Even to the seniors.
You can be 5, You can be
75.
55.
You know what? Superheroes, you've learned them when you're a kid and you know them when you're older. I had a lady, I was just walking back to a call and all of a sudden I hear the little doo-wop ditty about the Spider-Man. Spider-Man, Spider-Man. She was singing it for me and I was like, thank you very much. They get ecstatic, they turn into like little kids sometime, and even the kids turn into like just super fans, and they're like out there and they're waving and they're cheering and they're dressing up for us. I show up in my Spider-Man suit, ready to wear this all day long, and just to make people smile.
Thank goodness those two guys are paired together. Can you imagine if either one of them was working with someone else and it was like, you want to do what, when, like the entire shift? Anyway, it's fantastic, and maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I was watching the garbage truck just in the alley in the back of my house Tuesday, and it was kind of exciting. And had those guys been wearing superhero costumes, I mean, I'd be counting down the days until the next garbage day. Maybe I've revealed too much. Okay, at that point, let me just say that's the National for May the 8th. Good night.